Hello and welcome to the Luv Doc podcast with hosts Waldo Wachewski and Ophelia Brewski.
All right, let's dive into some relationship territory today. We got a really interesting Luv Doc question.
Oh, yeah.
About a husband and his, let's just say unconventional desires in his marriage.
Okay.
We're going to unpack this with zero judgment, though. It's a safe space here, promise.
Yeah.
And trust me, this deep dive goes to some unexpected places.
Like where?
Steiner Ranch. Anyone.
Steiner Ranch. All right. Well, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's start with the letter. This guy, let's call him Jack, says he's been happily married for 10 years. 2 years ago, they decided to try out what they call the lifestyle.
Ooh, the lifestyle.
Yeah. And that term itself can be a bit of a euphemism, right?
Right, like a secret code word, yeah.
Exactly. Hinting at something beyond the traditional boundaries of a monogamous relationship.
Okay, so not exactly swingers then.
Mm-hmm.
But they are engaging with other people.
Right.
But only single men.
Interesting.
And get this, Jack likes to watch his wife with these other men. Sometimes even joins in. But he emphasizes that he's not gay. Just finds it arousing to see his wife enjoying herself.
Okay, so this adds a whole other layer of complexity then. It's beyond just swinging. It really gets into the nitty-gritty of desire and arousal and how those can manifest differently for everyone. It also makes you think about the words we use for these relationships.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of which, where are they finding all these single men? The Luv Doc had some pretty funny ideas. Craigslist, Grindr, a Cupid, and of course, Steiner Ranch.
Yes, of course.
Apparently, it's just teeming with randy fellows sporting porn stashes and pineapple shirts.
That's quite the image.
Right.
But I guess it also shows how many different ways people are connecting these days and exploring their desires.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes you wonder, though, what kind of social or cultural things are driving these trends? Like, are some places just, I don't know, more conducive to certain types of connections than others? That's a whole other rabbit hole we could go down.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But let's get back to Jack and his letter.
Okay, back to Jack. So the letter reveals the real problem. While he's totally fine with this whole arrangement, his wife is not okay with him being with other women.
Even though he's told her about his own needs.
Exactly.
And this is where the Luv Doc uses a pretty loaded term, cuck.
Yeah.
That word carries a lot of baggage.
It definitely does, especially online and in politics.
That's right. But even setting aside the political stuff, that word really highlights the complex issues of consent and agency and how those can get tied up with pleasure and power in a relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a perfect example of how language evolves.
Yeah.
And how words can take on different meanings in different situations. And it makes us think about the consequences, both good and bad, of using those labels, especially when we're talking about such personal relationships.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. It's interesting, though, the Luv Doc does say that word, cuck. But they also say they're not into fetish shaming.
Right, like they're trying to walk a fine line,
Yeah.
address the issue, but not judge anyone. It's definitely a tough balance.
It is.
There's a difference between recognizing those power dynamics that might be there and judging people's choices. It's about being open and honest without resorting to shame.
For sure. So we've got this unconventional setup with Jack and his wife. We've got this evolving terminology and societal norms, and this underlying theme of power dynamics.
Right.
Where do we even go from here?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. The Luv Doc compares cucks to power bottoms.
Oh, okay.
It's strong language for sure, but it points to a deeper point about the roles people play in relationships. And not just sexually, but emotionally too.
Okay, that comparison definitely got my attention.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about who's actually in control in these situations. It's not always as clear-cut as it might seem.
You got that right.
Right.
And that's where we can start to unpack Jack's situation and how it reflects these bigger trends we see in relationships these days. So we're talking about cucks and power bottoms, but we got to remember, these are just labels, right? They don't always tell the whole story of what's really going on in each individual relationship.
That's true. It's easy to get caught up in the words and forget that we're talking about actual people here with their own feelings and motivations.
Exactly. I think these terms are kind of like a shorthand for a whole range of desires and power dynamics that can play out in all sorts of ways.
Holy crap! You're psychotically obsessed with the Luv Doc, but can't think of a flashy gauche way to share your obsession with the world? Stop thinking and make a beeline for the Luv Doc's home sweet home on the interwebs, thepleasurecraft.com, where you can find a veritable treasure trove of sick merch that will make even your coolest friends super gel. Honestly, I don't know why you didn't already think of this yourself, but you're welcome. Have fun on the pleasure craft. It was made just for you. Let me spell it out for you one more time. www.thepleasurecraft.com.
Right, so for some people, these labels might feel really empowering, like they're taking back control and redefining something that used to be taboo. But for others, they might feel limiting or even hurtful.
Yeah, especially if they're being used without consent.
Exactly.
It's like we're seeing this shift in how society views these relationships. There's still stigma, sure, but there's also more openness now to exploring different ways of expressing yourself. Like we're questioning those old boundaries.
Yeah, and language plays a big part in that, right? How we talk about these things shapes how we think about them.
Absolutely. Take the power bottom thing, for example.
Okay.
Sounds kind of crude at first, maybe even offensive to some people.
Yeah.
But it also highlights this interesting paradox.
How so?
Well, sometimes the person who seems to be submitting or giving in these dynamics might actually have more power or control in the relationship.
Huh. Like the saying, it's the quiet ones you got to watch out for.
Yeah, something like that.
But in this case, it's more like, it's the ones who seem to be giving the most, who might be getting the most out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where the whole discussion about power dynamics gets really interesting. Because it's not just about who's on top or who's making the decisions. It's about understanding all the subtle ways power can show up in a relationship, no matter what the sexual roles or labels are.
That makes sense. So bringing it back to Jack, the Luv Doc uses that provocative language.
Yeah.
But they're basically saying Jack's been in that power bottom position for 2 years now.
Yeah.
With no reciprocation.
Right.
They even suggest that maybe Jack should try to convince his wife that he's been, metaphorically speaking, going down on her for 2 years without getting anything in return.
Okay, well, that analogy is definitely attention-grabbing, to say the least.
Yeah.
But let's be real. Trying to guilt-trip someone into a threesome is probably not the healthiest way to go about this.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is. Jack needs to have an honest conversation with his wife
Right.
about his needs and what he wants, instead of trying to manipulate her into something she's not comfortable with.
Right, because the Luv Doc even admits that might not work, especially since Jack's wife is straight.
Yeah, so what's the alternative?
Well, what is it?
Communication.
Communication.
Honest, open, respectful communication. It's the foundation of any good relationship. But it's especially crucial when you're dealing with unconventional desires and boundaries.
Right, because even though Jack likes watching his wife with other men, his own needs aren't being met. And just avoiding that conversation is only going to make things worse.
Exactly. Bottling up your feelings and hoping things will magically change rarely works out.
Yeah.
It takes courage to talk about your vulnerabilities and desires.
It does.
But it's so important for building real intimacy and connection.
It is. It's like the Luv Doc said, the only person you can truly control is yourself.
Right.
Jack can't make his wife change what she wants, but he can decide what he wants to do in this relationship.
Exactly. It's about owning your own needs and being willing to have those difficult conversations, even if it means shaking things up a bit. Sometimes that's what it takes to reach a better understanding and create a more fulfilling dynamic for both partners.
I like that. So we've got Jack in this unconventional situation. We've got the Luv Docs dropping some truth bombs about power, communication, compromise. And then there's this bigger conversation happening about how society is changing and how those changes clash with individual desires.
It's a fascinating web, that's for sure. And as we continue this deep dive, we'll explore those societal shifts, the role of communication in navigating these unconventional desires, and that delicate balance between personal fulfillment and keeping a healthy relationship.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring some pretty complex stuff with Jack's situation.
We have.
Power dynamics, changing social norms, and that all-important communication in relationships.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey.
It has.
We started with this seemingly simple Luv Doc question.
Right.
But we ended up diving deep into these unconventional relationships, challenging those traditional ideas about monogamy,
Absolutely.
and even looking at how the language we use to talk about these things is changing.
Exactly. We've talked about the lifestyle, cucks, power bottoms, words that might make some people uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but they all point to this bigger conversation
Right.
about desire, consent, and how fluid relationships can really be.
And it's so important to remember those terms are helpful for discussion, but they don't always show the whole picture.
Yeah.
What might feel empowering for one person could be really hurtful for someone else.
That's true.
It all comes back to communication, respect, and making sure everyone feels safe and heard.
Absolutely. It's like we're seeing a shift happening. People are starting to understand that relationships can take many different forms.
Yeah, there's still stigma out there, for sure.
Definitely.
But there's also a growing movement towards acceptance.
For sure.
Like what was once taboo a generation ago is becoming more and more common today.
Okay, so what does all this mean for Jack then? We know he's not completely happy with things as they are. He enjoys some parts of it, but his own needs aren't being met. And the Luv Doc idea of guilt-tripping his wife, well, that just seems like bad advice.
Yeah, manipulating someone into doing something they don't want to do. That's never going to lead to a healthy relationship. The bottom line is, Jack needs to be open and honest with his wife.
Easier said than done, though, right?
It is.
These conversations can be really tough, especially when you're talking about something as personal as sex.
It's true.
But avoiding those conversations only makes things worse in the long run.
Absolutely.
It's like sweeping dirt under the rug. It's just going to keep piling up.
Yeah, and eventually someone's going to trip over it.
Exactly.
So they need to create a safe space where they can both talk about what they need and want without judgment.
Right.
Maybe they can find a compromise. Maybe they'll realize they just want different things. But whatever happens, that open communication is crucial.
It is. It's like the Luv Doc said, the only person you can truly control is yourself.
Right.
Jack can't change his wife, but he can decide how he wants to move forward.
And that's a powerful message for everyone, no matter what your relationship looks like.
It is.
It reminds us that we deserve to be in relationships that make us happy, where our needs and desires are respected. And sometimes that means having those difficult conversations, setting boundaries, and even being willing to walk away if those boundaries aren't honored.
Wow. Some heavy stuff to think about. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with a lot to ponder.
We are?
We've explored these unconventional relationships, the changing nature of desire, and how important communication is for navigating it all.
It's a complex landscape out there.
It is.
But Jack's story reminds us of some basic truths about relationships. The need for honesty, compromise, and standing up for what you need.
Yeah, and it shows us that there's no one right way to do love and relationships.
Nope.
What works for one couple might not work for another.
Exactly, and that's okay.
That's the beauty of human connection, right?
Right.
It's diverse, it's constantly evolving, there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
So as you go about your day, remember to be curious and compassionate about other people's relationships. Because what might seem strange or unconventional to you could be a source of deep love and happiness for them.
That's a great point. And most importantly, remember to prioritize open communication in your own relationships.
Yes.
It's the foundation for trust, intimacy, and a love that can overcome anything.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.
To read the column that spawned this podcast, go to austinchronicle.com/columns/the Luv Doc. There are probably worse things to do with your time, right?